Hi guys, I'm Bobsi, and in this video I'm looking at the broadcasts once again, but how to make a chat system instead, because this is actually the example that was made by Fishnet, but that some people are having trouble with. So I wanted to see how quickly I could make one myself, and I gotta say it was actually much easier than I expected. So just to show you how it's working, I just gotta start the server, I can write my username here, and I can write a message here, and when I press send, as you can see, it just goes into the chat, and this works for all clients as well, but I'll show you that later. So first, let's just take a quick look at what I've already set up. So I've set up a chat box, which is just the big black box up here. It's just set up as a panel with a background image that's faded out a bit. And it has a grid layout group to make sure that the messages, as I have here, they fill the entire row. As you can see, the more messages I have because of the grid layout group, they just set up nicely. I also have an input field, which is a Text Mesh Pro input field. Just right click UI and you can see input field Text Mesh Pro. And then I have the exact same type of field. It's just a copy paste, but for the message instead set up down here. This is basically the whole setup that I have for now. I've also set up a message, which is just a basic Text Mesh Pro element. There's nothing fancy with it. It's just a Text Mesh Pro. That's it. Now let's set up a game controller or whatever you want to hold the chat script. But in my case, I'm just going to use a game controller. And let's set up a new script. I'm just going to call this script chat broadcast guide because then I know what it's for. And I'm going to add the script to the game controller. Now, if you haven't watched the previous video on broadcast, there's a few things that I'm going to go over rather quickly because I don't want to explain myself twice. So we're just going to set up the required prerequisites, which is Fishnet, fishnet.broadcast, fishnet.connection, and then of course TM Pro to use the text mesh components. Now, some of the things that we got to know is the transform of the chat holder itself, which is where the elements are going to be spawned into. We need to have a reference so we can spawn the message element. And then we of course also need references to the Text Mesh Pro input fields with the username and the message. Now let's start by setting up the struct as we did last time with the position wise. This time I'm just going to call it message because that's what we want to send over the network. And this struct all just got to hold the username that we're sending and it got to hold the message that we're sending. I could also hold a color for the text or something if you want that. And we also got to set up the on received and on client received function. So let's do that now. I'm just going to call it MSG for message. And then we also have a private on client message received, which you got to remember it uses network connection as well as the required struct. Now, one thing that's important to note is, as far as I'm aware, Fishnet actually does have a username set up that you can use in the network connection, but that's not really what this guide is going to be about. So I'm not really going to get into it, and I'm just going to send the username through the struct as well. But you could technically not have the username here and have the username linked to the network connection instead. This would be a better way to do it for a real multiplayer game, but I just want to show you how to set up a basic chat by using broadcasts. Now let's also set up the on enable and on disable functions as we did in the last video. Remember, we need to give it our struct and then we need to give it the function it should run. So on the client manager, it should run on message received, and on the server manager, where we're going to do the exact same thing, it should just run on client message. And now we just unregister both and on disable as well. Now the last thing we got to do is make sure that we can press a button to actually send the function through. So if input.get key down, and I want to use enter. For some reason it's called return in Unity, but it's the same. And now just to make it easier, instead, as we did in the last one, to have the if is server and if is client check in here, we can actually just make a new function just to send the message. So I'm going to make private void send message, which is going to take in absolutely nothing. And I'm just going to run send message in here. Now what we can then do is we can make a new message that we can just call MSG here as well. That's equals to a new message that we will then populate in here. And then once we've populated that message, we can then broadcast it with the if instance finder.isServer, and then we want to do instance finder.server manager.broadcast, and we of course want to broadcast our message. And now we can do the exact same for if we are the client, but then instead we're going to be using the client manager to send it, like so. Now we just got to populate our message with the inputs from the player username and player message. So we can say username equals to player username text, and we can say message equals to player message text. And in the unmessage received is where we actually got to say what's going to happen now when we've received a new message. So what we want to do is we of course want to instantiate the new message object. I'm just going to call this final message to avoid any confusion. We're going to instantiate the MSG element, and we're going to make sure that the chat holder is the parent of the cell. Now we go into the final message and we grab the Text Mesh Pro UGI component, and we change the text in this to be our, in my case, message.username, and then I want to add the colons, and then here I want to set in the message.message. And then in the on-client message received function, we just go instance finder.server manager and we just broadcast the message that we've just received. All right, now the last thing that we got to do is we just got to make sure that we set up everything out here correctly. So I'm just going to feed it all the right things like so. And now let's build it and test it out. Now I've just started this standalone window as a client and the Unity game view as the server. And I'm just going to call them server and client. And I'm going to say hello, the server. And as you can see, this comes perfectly through to the server. And then from the server, I'm going to say hello, the client. And as you can see, this comes perfectly through to the client as well. And now we have a functioning chat system. Now, one last little thing that we can actually do just to make it a little bit nicer is when we send the message, we can actually make the player message.text equals to nothing. This means that whenever that we send it, we're actually going to empty the window as well. That's more to be expected. As you can see now, whenever I send it, it'll actually just remove it again. So I really hope that this was useful. It's just short and sweet, I think. I made this in absolutely no time and it just worked first try, so that was really cool. Now when I understand how broadcast works, so I really hope that the logic is coming through to you guys as well. It is a bit finicky, but that being said, it's actually super easy to work with once you understand that all the logic and all the functions really just happen within these on message receive functions with the broadcasts. Once you really have that set up, you can do whatever you want with it. You can send pretty much anything through the broadcast, standard variables and other serialized variables. And yeah, it's just super simple to work with. And I just hope that you have a wonderful day.